The sound of heavy machinery pierced the quiet suburban morning as Mark Davidson supervised the demolition crew dismantling his backyard swimming pool. At 47, with salt and pepper hair and permanent laugh lines etched around his eyes, Mark stood with arms crossed, watching years of family memories being scooped out and hauled away. But the old fiberglass pool, installed by the previous owners in the early 90s, had become more burden than blessing. "We're about halfway through, Mr. Davidson," shouted Raymond, the crew foreman, over the grinding of the excavator. "Should be done by tomorrow afternoon if the weather holds." Mark nodded, taking a long sip from his coffee mug. The decision to remove the pool hadn't been easy, but after his 2 children left for college last fall, the maintenance had become pointless. The pool leaked constantly, required expensive chemicals, and had become a mosquito haven more than a swimming spot. The final straw came when a structural engineer quoted repairs at nearly $15,000. "Dad, just fill the thing in," his daughter Megan had said during their weekly video call. "You always complained about it anyway." She was right. For years, Mark had grumbled about skimming leaves, balancing P levels, and the exorbitant water bills. As a high school science teacher, those extra expenses cut deeper than he liked to admit. His ex-wife, Diane, had been the pool enthusiast in the family, and since their divorce 3 years ago, the backyard feature had become a chlorinated monument to failed marriage and empty nest syndrome. Mark checked his watch. It was just after 9 a.m., and most neighbors were either at work or occupied with their daily routines. He had diligently notified everyone on the block about the demolition, leaving printed notices in mailboxes 2 weeks ago and sending follow-up emails to the neighborhood association. The work permits were prominently displayed near his front door. He'd done everything by the book. While watching the crew work, Mark noticed movement from the corner of his eye. Vivian Lancaster, from 3 doors down, was standing at the edge of his property, phone in hand. Even from this distance, Mark could see her pinched expression. Vivian, a retired accountant in her early 60s, had moved to the neighborhood just 18 months ago and had quickly established herself as the self-appointed guardian of community standards. Mark raised his hand in a friendly wave, but Vivian did not reciprocate. Instead, she began typing furiously on her phone, occasionally pausing to take photos of the demolition site. A sense of uneasiness crept up Mark's spine. He had interacted with Vivian only a handful of times, most memorably at last summer's block party, where she had delivered a 20-minute monologue about the declining property values due to certain residents' negligent lawn care practices. As Raymond's crew broke for lunch, Mark decided to approach Vivian, hoping to address whatever concerns she might have. "Good morning, Vivian," he called out, crossing his lawn toward her. "Everything okay?" Vivian's lips thinned to a nearly invisible line. "You can't do this, Mark. This is a direct violation of neighborhood covenants." Mark's brow furrowed. "I'm sorry. I checked with the HOA and city planning. All my permits are in order." The aesthetics clause, Mark. Section 7, paragraph 3. Vivian clutched her phone tighter. "All major landscape alterations must maintain the neighborhood's visual harmony." Mark stared at her, momentarily speechless. "Vivian, I'm filling it with soil and planting grass. It'll look better than a deteriorating pool." "The board will determine that," she replied acidly. "I've already documented everything and sent it to the committee, and the city inspector should be interested in whether you've properly disclosed the presence of drainage pipes." Mark felt his teacher patience wearing dangerously thin. "The inspector approved everything yesterday. Look, would you like to see the permits?" "That won't be necessary," Vivian said, turning on her heel. "I know how to handle situations like this." As she marched away, Mark stood bewildered in his own yard, watching the retreating form of his neighbor and wondering how his straightforward home improvement project had suddenly become a neighborhood incident. Little did he know this was only the beginning. By late afternoon, Mark had almost forgotten about the uncomfortable encounter with Vivian. The demolition crew had made significant progress, with most of the fiberglass shell now removed and loaded into the large dumpster parked in his driveway. Mark had spent the rest of the day grading lab reports and preparing lessons for his chemistry classes, occasionally glancing out his home office window to check on the work's progress. Around 4:30 p.m., just as the workers were beginning to clean up for the day, the unmistakable sound of sirens pierced the suburban quiet. Mark looked up from his laptop, brow furrowed in confusion. The sirens grew louder, and within moments red and blue lights flashed through his front windows. 2 police cruisers had pulled up outside his house. What in the world? Mark muttered, rising from his desk chair. He walked to the front door, utterly bewildered as 2 uniformed officers approached his porch. "Mr. Davidson?" asked the taller officer, a man with a stern expression and close-cropped hair. His nameplate read Officer Reeves. "Yes, that's me," Mark replied, trying to keep his voice even despite his racing heart. "Is there a problem?" "We received a report about illegal construction and potential environmental hazards at this address," Officer Reeves stated flatly. "Mind if we take a look at your permits?" Mark's momentary confusion quickly gave way to understanding and irritation. Vivian had actually called the police. He took a deep breath, reminding himself to remain calm and cooperative. "Of course, officers. I have all the documentation right here," Mark said, retrieving the folder he kept on the entryway table for exactly this purpose. "The city inspector signed off on everything yesterday afternoon." The second officer, a younger woman named Rodriguez according to her badge, accepted the folder and began examining the papers. Meanwhile, Raymond and his crew had stopped packing up their equipment and stood nervously near the excavator, exchanging concerned glances. Officer Rodriguez flipped through the documents carefully. "These seem to be in order, Mr. Davidson. Mind if we take a look at the site?" "Not at all," Mark replied, gesturing toward the backyard. "Follow me." As they walked around the side of the house, Mark spotted Vivian standing on her front lawn 3 houses down, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold with unmistakable satisfaction. Several other neighbors had emerged from their homes, drawn by the commotion of police vehicles in their ordinarily quiet neighborhood. Officer Reeves surveyed the demolition site, while Rodriguez continued reviewing the permits. "Someone reported that you're illegally disposing of pool chemicals and concrete without proper environmental clearance," Reeves explained, his tone now less accusatory. "They also mentioned potential damage to the neighborhood's drainage system." Mark sighed heavily. "That's completely false. The crew is licensed and bonded for pool removals. All chemicals were properly drained and neutralized weeks ago following EPA guidelines. The concrete debris is being hauled to an approved recycling facility." He pointed to Ramon. "My contractor has all the disposal documentation as well." Ramon nodded vigorously, already retrieving additional paperwork from his truck. Officer Rodriguez handed the permits back to Mark. "Everything looks legitimate to me. All the proper channels have been followed." The partner nodded in agreement after examining the contractor's documentation. "Appears to be a false alarm, Mr. Davidson. Sorry for the disruption." As the officers prepared to leave, Mark's next-door neighbor, Ellen Griffith, a retired librarian who had lived in the neighborhood for over 30 years, approached them. "Is everything all right?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "Mark's been planning this pool removal for months. He even brought it up at the February homeowners meeting." "Just a misunderstanding, ma'am," Officer Reeves replied diplomatically. After the police departed, a small crowd of neighbors remained, several of them approaching Mark with sympathetic expressions. Ellen patted his arm supportively. "We all know who made that call," she murmured. "Vivian's been on a power trip since she joined the HOA board." Mark nodded, exhausted from the unnecessary drama. I just don't understand why she's targeting me. I followed every regulation to the letter. Ellen glanced toward Vivian's house, where the woman had retreated inside after the police left without taking any action. Some people just need to control everything around them. Your pool project became her latest crusade. As the neighbors dispersed and Raymond's crew finally departed for the day, Mark stood alone in his half-demolished backyard, the evening sun casting long shadows across the excavated ground. What should have been a straightforward home improvement project had somehow turned into a neighborhood spectacle. His phone buzzed with a text from his daughter. "How's the pool demolition going, Dad?" Mark stared at the message, wondering how to explain that her father had become the target of the neighborhood busybody. With a rueful smile, he began typing, "You wouldn't believe the day I've had." Little did he know, Vivian Lancaster was just getting started. The following morning dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for the final day of pool demolition. Mark had slept poorly, his mind replaying yesterday's police encounter and wondering what Vivian might do next. He rose earlier than usual, made a strong pot of coffee, and sat on his back porch, watching the sunrise cast long shadows across the half-demolished pool site. Ramon's crew arrived promptly at 8 a.m., ready to complete the job. Mark had texted Ramon the night before, warning him about the possibility of further interference. The contractor had responded with understanding and a promise to keep all documentation readily available. "Good morning, Mr. Davidson," Raymond called cheerfully as his team began unloading equipment. "We should be finished by early afternoon if everything goes as planned." Mark nodded appreciatively, raising his coffee mug in greeting. "Thanks, Ramon. Sorry about yesterday's interruption." "No worries," Raymond replied with a shrug. "Not the first time we've dealt with nosy neighbors. Won't slow us down." The work progressed steadily through the morning. The remaining fiberglass pieces were removed. The hole was properly graded, and the crew began bringing in the fill dirt to prepare the area for topsoil and eventual grass seeding. Mark had decided to work from home, setting up his laptop on the patio to keep an eye on the proceedings while still managing to grade papers and prepare for tomorrow's classes. Around 11 o'clock, Mark noticed a silver sedan with official-looking markings pull into his driveway. A middle-aged man in khakis and a polo shirt emblazoned with the county logo stepped out, clipboard in hand. Mark's stomach tightened with apprehension as he rose to greet this new visitor. "Mr. Davidson, I'm Neil Pirtle from the County Water Authority," the man said, extending his hand. "We received a complaint about a potential water line disruption at this address." Mark shook the man's hand while inwardly sighing. "Let me guess, complaint filed by Vivian Lancaster." Neil's professional demeanor cracked slightly, revealing a hint of embarrassment. "I'm not at liberty to disclose who filed the report, but," he glanced meaningfully toward Vivian's house before continuing, "we're required to investigate all complaints regarding potential service disruptions." "Of course," Mark replied, motioning for Ramon to join them. "My contractor has all the necessary documentation, showing that we've identified and marked all water lines. The nearest main is well outside our work area." Ramon approached with a tablet in hand. "I can show you our surveys, sir. We use ground-penetrating radar before any excavation project." He swiped through several screens, displaying detailed imagery of the underground utilities around Mark's property. Neil studied the documentation, nodding approvingly. "This is actually more thorough than most residential projects I inspect," he admitted. "You've clearly done your due diligence." As Neil completed his inspection and prepared to leave, Mark noticed Vivian emerging from her house, phone in hand as usual. She hovered near her mailbox, clearly monitoring the interaction. When Neil departed without taking any action against the project, Vivian's face tightened visibly even from a distance. "I think your neighbor was hoping for a different outcome," Raymond observed quietly. Mark nodded warily. "She seems determined to find something wrong with this project." As if on cue, Mark's phone rang. The caller ID displayed Oak Ridge HOA office. With a deep breath, he answered. "Hello, Mr. Davidson. This is Patricia Winters, HOA president," came a clipped voice. "We've received multiple complaints about your current home improvement project potentially violating several community guidelines. I'm calling to schedule an emergency inspection." Mark pinched the bridge of his nose, fighting to maintain his composure. "Patricia, I discussed this project with the board in February. I have written approval from the Architectural Committee, dated March 15th. All city permits are in order. The police have already visited and found everything compliant. The County Water Authority just left after confirming we're not disturbing any utilities." A long pause followed. "I see," Patricia finally replied, her tone noticeably less rigid. "I wasn't aware the project had been previously approved. Let me check our records." While Mark waited, he spotted Ellen approaching from next door, carrying what appeared to be a plate of cookies. She waved cheerfully at Raymond's crew before joining Mark on the patio. "Thought you might need some sustenance to deal with Hurricane Vivian," Ellen whispered, setting down the plate. "I saw the county inspector. Then I noticed her on the phone immediately after he left." Mark covered the phone's microphone. "Now I'm on with the HOA president," he whispered back. "Third official visit in 24 hours. Ellen rolled her eyes sympathetically just as Patricia returned to the line. "Mr. Davidson, I've located the approval documentation. You're absolutely correct. I apologize for the confusion." Patricia's voice now carried a note of irritation that Mark suspected wasn't directed at him. "It appears these recent complaints failed to mention the existing approval." "I appreciate you checking, Patricia," Mark replied, relief evident in his voice. After ending the call, he filled Ellen in on the conversation. She shook her head in disbelief. "That woman has too much time on her hands," Ellen remarked, glancing toward Vivian's house. "I've lived here 32 years and never seen anyone file so many complaints in such a short time." As they chatted, Mark noticed Vivian marching purposefully down the sidewalk, smartphone held aloft like a weapon. Behind her trailed a. Mark assessed the situation unfolding in his front yard. Vivian with her supposed attorney, Raymond's crew pausing their work to observe the drama, and Ellen standing supportively by his side. Taking a deep breath, he walked calmly to meet the latest challenge. "Mr. Clarkson, is it?" Mark extended his hand toward the uncomfortable-looking man in the ill-fitting suit. "I'm Mark Davidson." The thin man hesitantly shook Mark's hand, but remained silent, his eyes darting nervously between Vivian and Mark. "Mr. Clarkson will be handling our complaint against you," Vivian announced, her voice carrying across the yard loud enough for the gathering neighbors to hear. "He specializes in property disputes and homeowner association litigation." Mark addressed the alleged attorney directly. "May I ask which firm you're with, Mr. Clarkson, and could I see your business card?" The man shifted his weight, clutching his worn portfolio tighter. I'm currently between firms, actually, establishing my own practice." His voice lacked the confidence one might expect from a litigation specialist. Ellen stepped forward. "Funny coincidence. My son-in-law is a partner at Benowitz and Palmer. They handle most of the HOA litigation in this county. I don't recall him mentioning a Clarkson." At this, the man's discomfort visibly increased. He glanced at Vivian, who was glaring at him expectantly. "Tell them about the lawsuit, Harold," Vivian commanded. "Yes, well," Harold Clarkson cleared his throat. "There are potentially some violations regarding." He fumbled with his portfolio, pulling out what appeared to be printouts from a website titled Homeowner Rights and Remedies. Mark turned his attention to Vivian. "Is Mr. Clarkson actually a licensed attorney, Vivian?" Before she could answer, a new voice joined the conversation. "He most certainly is not." Everyone turned to see Patricia Winters, the HOA president, striding purposefully toward them. In her early 60s, with immaculately styled silver hair and wearing a crisp blazer despite the afternoon heat, Patricia carried an air of authority that made even Vivian straighten her posture. Harold Clarkson, Patricia continued, was a paralegal at Simmons and Wright until last month. He isn't licensed to practice law in this state or any other, as far as I'm aware. Harold's face flushed deep red. I never claimed. You absolutely did, Vivian interrupted. You told me you could help with legal matters. As a document preparer, Harold protested. I said I could help prepare complaint documents, not that I was an attorney. Patricia turned her sharp gaze to Vivian. Ms. Lancaster, impersonating an attorney or misrepresenting someone as legal counsel is a serious matter, as is filing false reports with the police and county offices. Mark stood stunned, watching the confrontation unfold. Raymond had quietly rejoined his crew, and they were continuing their work, though everyone kept glancing toward the escalating situation. I've reviewed all the documentation regarding Mr. Davidson's pool removal, Patricia continued. Everything is properly permitted and approved. But I've also reviewed the HOA complaint log for the past year. She fixed Vivian with a stern look. 27 complaints filed since you moved in 18 months ago, 15 in the past 3 months alone. Whispers rippled through the small crowd of neighbors that had gathered at a respectful distance. The board exists to maintain community standards, Vivian replied defensively, not to allow people to destroy property values with unsightly construction projects. Patricia's expression remained unmoved. The board exists to enforce reasonable standards, not to harass homeowners undertaking legitimate improvements. An emergency meeting has been called for tomorrow evening to discuss your position on the architectural committee. Vivian's face paled. My position? I'm the only one with the expertise to call the police on projects that were already approved. Patricia interrupted. To waste county resources with false reports. To misrepresent someone as legal counsel. She shook her head firmly. The board has serious concerns about your judgment, Vivian. Harold had begun inching away from the confrontation, clearly eager to extract himself from the situation. Vivian noticed and grabbed his sleeve. Don't you dare leave. We had an agreement. I'm not going to jail for practicing law without a license, Harold hissed, yanking his arm away. With a mumbled apology to Mark, he hurried down the street to a parked sedan and drove away. As the confrontation continued between Vivian and Patricia, Ellen gently pulled Mark aside. You know what this is really about, don't you? She asked quietly. Mark shook his head, genuinely confused. Her house is the only one on the block without a pool, Ellen explained. When she moved in, she tried to get approval for one, but couldn't afford the $65,000 estimate. The board also had concerns about the placement affecting the drainage easement. Mark's eyes widened with understanding. So she's upset because I'm removing the pool she wishes she had. Ellen nodded. Classic case of, if I can't have it, no one should. She's been especially vocal at AHOA meetings about maintaining neighborhood character, which apparently means everyone needs a pool except her. Meanwhile, Vivian's voice had risen to a near shout. This is a conspiracy. Everyone's against me because I'm the only one who cares about standards. Patricia remained calm but firm. Ms. Lancaster, I suggest you return home and prepare your statement for tomorrow's meeting. This public spectacle isn't helping your case. Vivian looked around at the neighbors watching the scene unfold, then at Mark and his half-filled pool site. For a moment, her expression shifted from anger to something more vulnerable, perhaps embarrassment or even shame. Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and marched back toward her house. As the crowd dispersed, Patricia approached Mark with an apologetic smile. I'm sorry about all this, Mark. Had I known the extent of her campaign against you, I would have stepped in sooner. "Thank you for intervening," Mark replied sincerely. "I'm just trying to fix up my backyard." Patricia nodded. "Your project will continue without further interference, I assure you." By late afternoon, Raymond's crew had completed the pool removal. What had once been a deteriorating fiberglass eyesore was now a neatly filled depression awaiting topsoil and grass seed. Mark surveyed the transformed backyard with satisfaction, already envisioning the garden beds he planned to install in the spring. "We're all finished, Mr. Davidson," Raymond announced, handing over the final paperwork. "The city inspector will come tomorrow to sign off on the completion. Topsoil delivery is scheduled for Friday, and we can spread it and plant grass seed then if that works for you." "Perfect," Mark replied, shaking the contractor's hand gratefully. "Thank you for handling everything so professionally, especially with all the distractions." Raymond chuckled. "Hey, at least it makes for a good story, right? Not every pool removal involves the police, county inspectors, and a fake attorney." After the crew departed, Mark stood alone in his backyard as the setting sun cast a golden glow across the newly leveled ground. The day's events had left him mentally exhausted, but relieved that the project was finally complete. He pulled out his phone and took several after photos to share with his children. A text from his daughter Megan arrived almost immediately after he sent the pictures. "Looks great, Dad, though I'm more interested in this neighborhood drama you mentioned. Spill the tea." Mark smiled, about to type a response when the sound of his doorbell interrupted him. With a weary sigh, he headed to the front door, half expecting to find another official or perhaps Vivian with a new complaint. Instead, Ellen stood on his porch holding a casserole dish, accompanied by a middle-aged couple Mark recognized as the Thompsons from across the street. "We thought you might be too tired to cook after all the excitement," Ellen explained with a warm smile. "Barbara made her famous lasagna, and I brought wine," added Jim Thompson, holding up a bottle of red. "Figured you could use it after dealing with Vivian the Vigilante." Mark laughed, genuinely touched by the gesture. "You all are amazing. Please come in." What started as a simple dinner invitation soon expanded as more neighbors arrived, each bringing dishes, drinks, or desserts. By 7 p.m., Mark's living room and newly renovated backyard hosted an impromptu neighborhood gathering. People mingled on the patio, some venturing onto the filled-in pool area to inspect the work and offer compliments on the improvement. Patricia Winters arrived fashionably late, bringing an expensive bottle of scotch that she insisted on sharing with Mark. They settled in lawn chairs overlooking the former pool site. "Quite the transformation," Patricia remarked, sipping her drink. "Both the yard and the neighborhood dynamics." Mark nodded thoughtfully. "I never expected removing a pool would create such community bonding." "Sometimes it takes a common adversary," Patricia mused. "Though I do feel a bit sorry for Vivian." "Have you heard from her since this afternoon?" Mark asked. Patricia shook her head. She emailed her resignation from the architectural committee an hour ago. Very terse. Just said she no longer wishes to contribute to a community that doesn't value proper standards. Their conversation was interrupted by Ellen, who approached with an unexpected guest in tow. To Mark's surprise, it was Harold Clarkson, the paralegal who had been present during the afternoon's confrontation. "Look who I found lurking by the mailbox," Ellen announced. "Says he wanted to apologize but wasn't sure he'd be welcome." Harold stood awkwardly, hands jammed in his pockets. "Mr. Davidson, I'm truly sorry about earlier. Vivian hired me to prepare some documents, but things escalated beyond what I expected." Mark gestured for Harold to take a seat. "No permanent harm done. Though I am curious, how did you end up involved in this situation?" Harold accepted a glass of wine from Jim Thompson before explaining. "I was laid off last month. Been trying to start a document preparation service for people who can't afford full legal representation. Vivian found me through an online ad. He took a long sip of wine. She initially asked about filing a complaint with the HOA. When that didn't work, she kept escalating, calling officials, demanding more aggressive action. I should have walked away sooner. As Harold spoke, a hush fell over the nearby conversations. Several neighbors had gathered to listen to his explanation. She offered to pay me double if I'd look more official today. Harold continued, shamefaced. I never claimed to be an attorney, but I didn't correct her when she introduced me that way. I needed the money, but that's no excuse. I compromised my ethics. Patricia fixed him with a stern look. That was a very poor decision, Mr. Clarkson. I know, he acknowledged. After today, I'm shutting down the document service and focusing on finding a proper paralegal position again. This was a wake-up call. The conversation gradually shifted to other topics as more neighbors joined their circle. Stories were shared about previous neighborhood disputes, home improvement disasters, and past run-ins with Vivian. The evening took on a cathartic quality, with laughter and camaraderie. 3 months had passed since the pool removal drama. The October morning air carried a crisp chill as Mark sipped his coffee, admiring his transformed backyard from the patio. Where the deteriorating pool had once been, lush green grass now grew, bordered by newly installed raised garden beds filled with 4 vegetables: kale, Brussels sprouts, and rainbow chard. The space felt renewed, purposeful, just as Mark had envisioned. His phone chimed with a text from his son Ryan. "Dad, just saw your garden pics. Looks amazing. Still can't believe the crazy pool saga. Any updates on Hurricane Karen?" Mark smiled at his son's nickname for Vivian. The story of the pool removal and the subsequent neighborhood drama had become a family legend, with both his children requesting regular updates during their weekly calls. Typing a response, Mark realized how much had changed in the relatively short time since that chaotic week in July. Gardens coming along great. Vivian's house sold last week. Closing is next month. Neighborhood's been pretty peaceful. He had just hit send when the doorbell rang. Mark opened the front door to find Ellen bundled in a cardigan against the autumn chill, holding a ceramic pot of chrysanthemums. "Morning, neighbor. Thought these might look nice on your porch," she said cheerfully, handing over the vibrant yellow flowers. Their friendship had blossomed following the pool incident. Ellen regularly brought over cuttings from her garden and borrowed vegetables from Mark's new beds. They'd even started a weekly movie night with a rotating group of neighbors, a tradition born from the impromptu gathering on the day of the pool completion. "They're perfect, Ellen." "Thank you," Mark replied, placing the pot near his front door. "Have time for coffee." As they settled on the porch with steaming mugs, Ellen nodded toward Vivian's house, where a sold sign swayed gently in the breeze. "Have you met the new owners yet?" "Briefly," Mark replied. "Young couple with twin toddlers. He's a pediatrician, she's an architect. Seem very nice. Heard they're planning to put in a playground where Vivian's rose garden was," Ellen said with a hint of amusement. "Life's funny that way." Mark nodded thoughtfully. Speaking of Vivian, Patricia mentioned she received an email from her yesterday. Ellen raised her eyebrows. "Really? What did it say?" "Nothing dramatic. Just letting the HOA know her forwarding address for the final paperwork. But Patricia said she mentioned that her new condo community has properly maintained communal amenities." Mark chuckled, "Including a pool." Ellen laughed softly. So she finally got her pool after all. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Patricia Winters, carrying a thick folder and wearing her characteristic crisp blazer despite the casual Saturday morning. "Mark, Ellen, good morning," she called as she approached the porch. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," Mark assured her. "Coffee." Patricia declined with a smile, taking a seat and placing the folder on the table between them. "I wanted to drop this off in person rather than leaving it in your mailbox. Mark eyed the folder curiously. What's this? The Architectural Committee has been reviewing the community guidelines, Patricia explained. In light of recent events, we realized some of our policies were overly restrictive and outdated. The board has drafted proposed revisions. She tapped the folder. We'd like you to head the subcommittee on landscape modifications. Mark blinked in surprise. Me? After all the controversy my project caused? Patricia smiled wryly. Perhaps because of it. You followed every rule to the letter despite unreasonable interference, and the result speaks for itself. She gestured toward his beautifully transformed backyard. The committee needs people with both patience and vision. Ellen nudged Mark's arm encouragingly. You should do it. Who better to help revise guidelines than someone who just navigated them successfully? Before Mark could respond, the rumble of a moving truck drew their attention. The vehicle was backing into Vivian's, now the new family's driveway. A young couple stood watching, each holding a toddler on their hip. Looks like your new neighbors are arriving, Patricia observed. Delightful family. I met them during the home inspection. Mark noticed the young mother looking somewhat overwhelmed as movers began unloading furniture. On impulse, he stood up. What do you say we welcome them properly? Within an hour, what had started as a simple greeting had evolved into an impromptu moving day assistance party. Mark and several other neighbors helped direct furniture, while Ellen organized a lunch station on the front lawn. The new owners, David and Sophie Chen, appeared both surprised and deeply grateful for the neighborhood's warm welcome. We've never experienced anything like this, Sophie confessed to Mark as they took a break, watching her husband and several neighbors assembling the twins' beds. In our old neighborhood, we barely knew anyone's names.